I am truly blessed to be welcoming Jolene Park today, all the way from the other side of the world in the US, in Denver. How are you, Jolene?
I'm great, and I'm really looking forward to this conversation. So good to be here with you.
Thank you so much. So, just a little bit about Jolene. So, Jolene is a fellow functional nutritionist, and she specializes in something that's truly close to my heart, which is what's known as gray area drinking. And so, Jolene stopped drinking in 2014 and has studied the functional impact of food, emotions, environments, and movement in relationship to our physical bodies, and which she speaks about in her TED talk about gray area drinking that has had over 390,000 views. Jolene founded Healthy Discoveries in 2001 and created Craving Brain private coaching for individuals, the Sober Choice online course, and the public and the Nourish Method training program for coaches and healthcare practitioners who would like to specialize in this incredible area of gray area drinking and coaching. And so I guess the conversation today, well, we're putting it out there. It's about our relationship with alcohol, and I guess what we're really wanting to empower the audience with is just some knowledge about how they might be able to understand where they're at in their journey. And I guess if we can get started, perhaps your background, your specialty, then we can go down the windy road of some additional questions.
Right, right. Let's jump in. So I certified in functional nutrition in the late 90s, so 1999. Have been in the functional medicine, functional nutrition world for many, many years. I love it. It's my passion. As you know, there's always things changing and evolving, I'm just a lifelong learner in that area and with the physiology, with the body. Um, and worked in corporate wellness, then using my teaching functional nutrition, kind of that comprehensive approach of well-being for employee health for many, many years. And then my own personal story, doing all of this work, working with clients, doing nutrition consulting. In 2014, I stopped drinking alcohol. And so I kind of had, this parallel lives of really loving all things health and wellness, but living my personal life out with my girlfriends, girls' night out, book clubs, going, trying new restaurants when they'd open and having red wine. And it was part of my work too. I would go to functional medicine conferences in the early 2000s, and they would talk about, the antioxidant component in different red wines and the, the resveratrol and those types of things. So it was we were foodies, there was that component. But then personally, it was also that fun, let's go out, have a couple drinks. And there was nothing about my drinking around professional colleagues or even personal friends that that anyone would have pointed to me or did point to me saying, oh, Jolene's really out of control with her drinking. I drank like people around me drank, my social circle. But we were all drinking a lot. It was easy to do. And then because I was in wellness, there were many times over the years that I would take breaks, like I would do a nutrition challenge or 30 days of yoga. And, in that would be, I'm not going to drink alcohol. And so people didn't really pay much attention. It was just like, oh, it's part of the fitness challenge or the wellness challenge. So I could kind of fly under the radar with it. But then but inside I knew it's like, I'm drinking too much. So I'm going to do this nutrition challenge. And then after a month or a couple months, I'd say, well, but I don't need to be so restrictive. Like I want to be a social drinker. So I'd go back to drinking and go back to this level that I knew quietly, internally was too much. And so I did that Groundhog Day for a couple of years. And then in 2014, I just got to a point internally, silently, where I just had this conversation with myself. And it was just like, I was 43. I don't want to keep doing this merry-go-round. It's the same thing over and over. I stop drinking, I feel better, and then I think I'm not that bad. I don't need to be so black and white restrictive. I'd go back to drinking, but nothing changed. It's like, I just don't want to keep doing this through my 40s. And so I just made a quiet, silent decision to stop. And I did. I stopped for good. It'll be 9 years, December 2023. And I was pretty quiet about it the first year, still doing work in wellness, still doing my nutrition work. But then there was this conversation. Some podcasts were starting to pop up around 2014. One podcast in particular, two women were just talking about alcohol in a different way. They weren't going to 12-step meetings, but they were talking about just kind of this newer, sober for the health of it, and quitting drinking more because they want to, not because they need to. And I wrote them an email and I said, I love the conversations you're having. I love listening to who you're interviewing. It's just such a new, fresh conversation. But I think you're missing a big piece here, which is the biochemical piece and this neurotransmitter piece, because that had been my work for so many years. And what I then used when I stopped drinking, I kind of piecemealed some things together to boost my own neurotransmitters after not using alcohol. And I just thought that email would fall to the bottom of the inbox, but they replied and they said, "This is good. Will you come on and talk about it?"
Wow.
And so organically, it wasn't really a business strategy. Just it was something I was real interested in, just real passionate. I felt like it was a real missing piece. And unbeknownst to me, this business happened and the doors blew off as soon as I went on that podcast. And what happened was hundreds of women filled my inbox and said, "Your story is my story. I don't have a rock bottom like you. I function just fine. But I know quietly, silently, this little internal voice inside, I'm drinking too much." And they said, "Will you coach me?" And I was like, okay. So I quickly kind of shifted my strictly nutrition coaching into using the nutrition, working with the neurotransmitters, working with the well-being work I was doing, but then specifically as you stop drinking, putting those pieces in. And that was 2016. And I've had a full-time coaching practice working with, self-identified former gray area, well, they're now former gray area drinkers, but really high achieving, high performing, a lot of professional women, a lot of women in the healthcare, who are nurses and nutritionists and doctors and social workers, therapists, who are coming forward saying, "This is how I drink. I'm working with clients during the day. I love my work. I love health and wellness, working emotionally or working physically. But then I'm going home at night and the thing that takes the edge off is some wine."
Yep.
So it's, again, it wasn't, that I started out, woke up one day a decade ago saying, "This is going to be a business. This is what I'm going to do." It surprised me more than anyone. Once I started talking about it, how much of a need there was to do this work.
Powerful. And for those of you that don't know, I can definitely identify with Jolene's story. In fact, I remember in my 30s coming home to a group of friends and saying, "I think I'm an alcoholic." But we were all partying the same amount, but it was just I just knew in my soul that something wasn't right for me personally. Like I knew that this was something that was, it was possessing my thoughts. It was taking over. When the stressful event would happen, I would instantly be thinking about, well, it's okay, I can have a glass of wine later. And so, but it's just the Australian normal, that's what we do. And that's how we go out and we socialize. And I think we do. This is a conversation that needs to be had. And, it can be the same for so many different styles of addictions as well. It's not just alcohol, but it's just so great because once we can identify this within ourselves, that's when we can find people like you that can support us on this journey for freedom. And that's ultimately what it is, not to be owned by something. So can we go? I'd love to understand a little bit more around, you talked about neurotransmitters, and in particular around sobriety and just helping people kind of come out of that gray area. What does that look like?
Well, so in my functional nutrition and functional medicine training, I trained and learned. It was part of what I learned over the years. So I was going to a lot of functional medicine conferences here in the U.S. And I feel like once I got certified, I spent a decade with all this continuing education. And one of the continuing ed pieces that I did was on neurotransmitters,
Wow.
from two medical doctors, an internal medicine doctor and a neurologist, who were they taught this weekend workshop, and the work they used was from another medical doctor in New York. And so it's a neurotransmitter quiz. It's what I then now use with my gray area drinking clients. And I did that in 2006. I kept drinking. And it wasn't, again, the neurotransmitter work is not specifically around alcohol. You can certainly use it, because we can use it for alcohol support, because when we drink, it depletes all of our neurotransmitters.
Yeah.
But we also, in functional medicine, use the neurotransmitter support to support anxiety and depression and OCD and compulsive eating, and all of those things. Um, and so I knew, because I had been trained in it and knew that I was already low in GABA, and knew that's why I loved red wine. It gave me that kind of false positive GABA feeling, the first glass or two of wine. But it's not a real, GABA. It's actually depleting my GABA. Then I would want more red wine. So when I quit drinking, and I had taken some GABA supporting herbs before. I'd done some GABA practices, but I was like, when I quit, I'm like, okay, this is where the rubber meets the road. Like, this is time to really dedicate myself and do the practices, add in some of these nutrients to boost my GABA, because I know my GABA is low. I've been drinking. I know that's why I was using wine. So that's what I did. I am of just kind of putting together those missing physiological pieces. And then when I started talking about it and working with people were coming to me, I said, all right, let's start there. I just believe so strongly in the physiology, looking and what's depleted, what's deficient, because often we think we go after the psychology, which
Yeah.
is beautiful. I mean, I've done therapy, I've done somatic coaching. I'm all about, there is that emotional work, and I work with that too, of that the stress response. Are we in a fight, a flee, or a collapse state, when we get squeezed and stressed? So there are those emotional patterns that we want to look at too, but it's still physiology. So I believe very much physiology first, psychology second, and things that we are thinking are a psychological piece, anxiety, sleep, whatever. We need to rule out deficiencies and depletions physically. Are we low in B6? Are we low in magnesium? Are the neurotransmitters low? What's going on with the gut because of that gut-brain connection? If the microbiome is off in the gut, it's going to disrupt neurotransmitters. We have more neurotransmitter receptors in the gut than in the brain. And so just unwinding all of those functional medicine, functional nutrition pieces absolutely supported me when I put those into place the first 30 days of not drinking and even beyond. And so that was the email that I wrote into the podcast saying there's this missing piece here. And it's certainly what clients really resonate. It's what other coaches that I train really resonate with. It's such a liberating, empowering approach, as opposed to that psychological character defects or
Yeah.
weakness, a weak will. And it's so outdated with the neuroscience that we know today. And we need to be applying the neuroscience and the up-to-date physiology with the craving brain.
Yes.
Whether people are craving alcohol or sugar, or they're scrolling their phone too much, we want to go in and fill in. It's the body's depleted and it's trying something. And there's no psychological weakness in that. It's just like a diabetic. If their blood sugar is low or high, we go in physically and support the diabetic physically. And so if our brain is depleted, we want to physically support it. It has nothing to do with us, a psychological weakness.
I just love that, because of all of the stuff that I've, done, cognitive behavioral therapy and other strategies, dealing with stress and trauma. And you do end up sort of coming out of that going, oh, well, I've got these tools, I've got my list of things to do when I feel stressed. But ultimately there was never any, that was all sort of the cognitive, the as you say, like the thoughts. And then you walk away from it and you go, oh, I just had a glass of wine. And then there's the shame and the guilt and all the other emotions that you bury yourself under that roller coaster that you sort of allude to in your podcast. And I definitely agree. You've definitely nailed this missing piece. And I think, for somebody that's watched, my mother die at 44 with alcohol addiction, and I've watched it go through a lot of my family, and feeling quite powerless over, why can't they just stick to it? Or why can't, why is this such a grip? Why has it got such a grip on us? And so that GABA piece, I think, is really powerful. and just knowing that there's maybe a pathway out, and maybe it's not just that component, maybe it's the whole piece, and just what you've created is just beautiful. Amazing. So just, I guess, what would be, so you sort of talked about your own journey going through and sort of saying, hey, this is not working, but what would you say your overall inspiration is now for developing the programs that you've developed?
Oh, I am so passionate about working with healthcare practitioners. So I think there's a couple problems. The first is this: we've turned a blind eye to this gray area.
Yeah.
So historically, we've had kind of this black or white two categories. Either people are at this end stage rock bottom type
Yeah.
drinking, or they really don't drink. And the reality is most people aren't in those two categories. And
Yeah.
most people are in between, they're in the gray. So that's, the first real missing piece that I give voice to is the gray area of this. It's how everyone around us drinks, and we just turn a blind eye to it and say, oh, well, we're not that bad. We're not sitting on a park bench, right, with
La, la,
our
la, la,
eyes
la.
yellow from jaundice, drinking out of
Yeah.
a paper bag. And it's
Yeah.
like, it's not, that's done a real disservice. And so that's the first piece. And then the second piece is then once we stop drinking, because a characteristic of gray area drinking is gray area drinkers can stop drinking, and they do stop drinking. I stopped drinking many times. So a gray area drinker is not someone who needs medical intervention. And again, I'm not throwing shade on that at all, no shame or blame. It's all physiology. If the physiology needs that level of support, if somebody's having a seizure, you need physiological support. A gray area drinker doesn't need that level of physiological support yet. I mean, if you
Yet.
keep drinking, you keep going down that. It's a slippery slope. But this is the second problem: is that when we quit drinking, there's always been this kind of acute care of stopping the drinking. But then what? And there's so much then what. Really, the 2 years, the first 2 years from the last drink, but even up to 5 years. And that's the work I do with clients. It's all that repair, replenishment, rewiring of the blood sugar and the neurotransmitters, and then even the emotional pieces of socially, and working through those components of what do I do for fun? How do I regulate my nervous system if I'm not connecting with alcohol or using alcohol for fun? So there's all that what's next that's missing. And then the third piece that's missing in this is the practitioners, because my clients all the time, I mean, over and over, it's so common that I hear, and I'll post on Instagram sometimes about this, and people will fill the comment thread of telling, recounting a story of how they'll say, I wish my therapist or doctor would have said, you're drinking too much. But
Wow.
the stories then that they'll share is, they'll say, oh, my doctor's just like, oh, you've just been a little stressed, let me up your antidepressant, or it's not like you're an alcoholic or anything, or just everything in moderation. And even people around us will say that, spouses or partners, they're like, you're just worrying about this too much. But when the practitioners say that, it gets very confusing, kind of that person in authority, even like a personal trainer or a nutritionist or a coach. And often they themselves are drinking in the gray area. And so then when it's in front of them with a client, it's then very hard to, what do I do with this? Because then it's confronting their own drinking. And so it perpetuates the problem. And so I'm really, really passionate about training and educating practitioners on this gray area, the science behind it, and then how to resource and support their clients. And they don't have to go into, a full-on coaching engagement with clients, but just to know where the resources are, where to refer, where to, there's the work that I do. I have a whole coaching network. There's so many resources and podcasts and things to watch and listen to, and that practitioners can start to point their patients to, instead of just brushing it away. I'm like, oh, you're just a little stressed. It's like, no, if someone ever says, and we know that little inkling inside, that little, poking of like, I know this, I know I'm drinking too much. We need a practitioner to say, I hear you. This is too much alcohol. And clients say that all the time. I wish somebody would have just said, this is too much. I've never had a client get offended or not. They want to be told, no, this is too much. And the government regulations. It's not my opinion. It's not, coming from the practitioner, just like a moral high horse. The regulations are getting more and more strict. Or strict isn't the word. Just as far as like the parameters of what is safe and what is healthy. And it came out in the Lancet Medical Journal in 2018 saying that there is no safe or healthy recommended intake level of alcohol. So anything over 7 drinks a week for women is too much. It's heavy, risky drinking. And clients just want their doctor, coaches, and therapists to say, if it's more than 7 drinks, this isn't my opinion. This is the medical research. It's too much. You're drinking too much.
And I think when we're talking about standard drinks, like the glasses that we pour ourselves at home at a party are not a standard drink. They're typically double. So even that, like, there's education around what is a standard drink. And I love the fact that this is now becoming a thing, because I feel like there was perhaps some science, inverted commas, given in the 80s that was sort of suggesting that red wine was really healthy for you. And, I always laugh at that study, because when I think about it, it was something like the person that has 2 standard drinks of red wine, has a better caliber health than, and I thought, well, the biggest difference is that the person that's just had 2 glasses can stop at 2 glasses. But if you're a gray area drinker, you can't stop at 2 glasses, because the GABA neurotransmitters have now been firing, and you're like, oh, that feels nice. I kind of like this feeling. And you keep going. So I always think to myself, what a silly study, because unless you're one of those people that is able to stop at 2, it's not a real picture of the outcome anyway. So the overall philosophy now of your programs, like, because you've talked about 3 things that I've never heard anybody talk about when it comes to addiction. And I guess, what would you say your overall philosophy is now for working with coaches?
Well, training them on gray area.
Yeah.
And assessing clients and working with clients, and in a very comprehensive way. I work all in the physiology. So there's other coaching programs out there that do the cognitive, which is great. They work together really, really well. But we need to beef up and learn more about the physiology with the brain. So that's really, where I focus. Tell me your question again.
I guess just the overall philosophy. And I think you've answered it, because, even being a functional nutritionist, you're kind of incorporating that functional element of it. It's like, okay, so here's the problem, but let's support it functionally in an essence. Like, that's kind of the philosophy.
Yep.
You touched on it very briefly, just the mental health side of it. So of the people that you've kind of held their hand going through this process of having an empowerment around gray area drinking, how many, as a rough percentage, would you say actually have underlying mental health stuff going on, whether it be anxiety, depression, ADD, OCD?
Yeah. Anxiety is a big piece. And many clients will acknowledge that, self-identify with that, because again, a lot of this demographic is high achieving professional women, high performing moms. They're performing in whatever kind of their task and role is, and so the anxiety is there to just, it's a lot to shoulder and to hold, and everything that we're juggling. So anxiety goes hand in hand, and a component of anxiety can even be kind of the obsessive compulsive of just everything in order, and the food just being just right, and not missing an exercise workout. Like there's a compulsive side, kind of an obsessive. Sometimes it's not out and out panic attack, but it's just that rigidity, and food can come in with that around anxiety as well. So, but then also another piece is adversity. So, are you familiar with the ACE study in the U.S.?
I have heard of it, but it's not fresh to my mind.
Okay, it's the biggest public health study that was done in the U.S., and it's called the Adverse Childhood Experience Study.
Oh, yes.
And so they're looking at early adversity which is very common, because we think, oh, that's not us, that's not. But actually, the study is so fascinating because it took place in San Diego, California. Most of the whole kind of study group, college educated, has health insurance under Kaiser Permanente, a huge insurance company here in the U.S. And white Caucasian. So it wasn't kind of, oh, those people on the other side of the tracks. It actually was, this demographic of the white professional female, and then looking at early adversity and then what that does to the immune system and the nervous system. So for some people, can set up chronic disease. Like we'll say, well, they were a vegan and they did yoga and they had a heart attack at 43. And then you look at early adversity of how that set the trajectory in their immune system. For others of us, with some early adversity, it can set the trajectory for the nervous system. And so there's some of that early trauma, and it's very, very common. I mean, the study just shows how common it is. And we talk about big T, little t. So we think big T, like really kind of horrific trauma, but really we're talking little t of just bullying or feeling like we just had to shoulder through and take care of things all on our own and didn't have maybe that emotional support. And so it's unwinding, a lot of that can be part of that characteristic of some early adversity, which then can feed into anxiety, as playing out of just keeping everything in order together, doing it all. And then where's the valve? Where's the pressure relief of all of that? And alcohol comes in. So it makes so much sense when we can see that pattern. It's like, of course, like the nervous system has to have some relief, some way to discharge. Like, of course, we're drinking wine.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can relate, when I was in my past career in property, you're working 12-hour days, you're managing staff, you're managing big transactions, big amounts of money. And, the stress was high, but the way that you got, you'd start off the day with coffee and you'd finish the day with wine. And that's just the way it kind of ended. And it was a system or a framework, but it's not a sustainable framework for good health. And I guess that's really it. And when we all look at our past, the big T and the little t, I love that analogy because I think, we don't all have to go through chronic sort of, events to feel like something's missing in our life. So that's just so beautiful. Thank you for explaining that. And
well,
I guess,
I'll just interject really quick of
yeah.
one phrase that I often use is that if we haven't been shown or we didn't learn how to regulate, we will medicate.
Yes.
And most of us we don't learn it in school. We don't learn, it's just that, how do we regulate? Because we're all going to get squeezed. Like life is going to do lifey things. None of us are immune to that. But then how do we regulate and recalibrate and come back to baseline when, we come up against hard winds metaphorically in life? And so if we're not knowing how to regulate and come back to that kind of home base place in our nervous system, we will medicate, because it then feels temporarily like we've come back to that place.
Yeah, absolutely. It wasn't really until I hit my 30s that I realized that I had absolutely no tools to regulate my nervous system. And it's still something that I'm like, I haven't mastered it yet. So I think it's important because I know for a fact that my parents post World War II migrating to Australia, growing up in the 70s, big party, that was just normal. There wasn't probably a childhood photograph that I have seen of my family without, a glass of wine in their hand. It didn't exist. And you think to yourself, well, if they didn't have any tools to regulate, then they're definitely not able to teach us. And so
well, their tools were the
alcohol.
And then your nervous system learned that, and many of us go through that. So our nervous systems are responding to our environment, and so we learn from what the environment is doing. And I'm always interested in that when I work with clients. Of, what were your parents drinkers, and if they weren't, what did they do to cope? Because we're all doing something on some spectrum, and so we model it, and that's how we're learning something. But now we've got such great tools from the neurobiology studies, from the neuroscience. And that's, then that's the work I do. And I love sharing those tools.
Excellent. You've definitely got that missing link, I feel. And I've done some different things. I tried out the AA, I've tried out some other things, and just to see what's going to stick. And it's so fascinating how there's definitely a gap in Australia around, how to manage this stuff. And so to be able to do it online with your support is just an incredible resource for people. So I had a few other questions which were more around, I was going to talk about the big elephant in the room, which was the big T and the little t. And so I guess I'm curious as a parent, and one of the things that I've identified, I've got two children, 4 and 6, and I've just, one of the things that's been really on my mind is, what am I modeling here? And, what sort of things are we teaching our children just through our actions subconsciously? And that's probably been one of my biggest drivers as, learning more about myself, going in, feeling in it like in an environment that I'm now safe and I can explore these feelings and mechanisms of stress response. And so of your questionnaires, how many, I guess as a rough percentage, how many of your people that have gone through the course have actually witnessed drinking as a norm?
I would say most.
Yeah.
80%.
Yeah. Right.
Very,
So
very common.
fascinating. So if we're witnessing that, then that's technically what we're absorbing as by osmosis, as littlies.
Yeah, and what I want to say about this is where the hope it comes in with this, because I know that like listening, as moms, and it's like, oh my gosh, what if my kid, and feeling sometimes some of the guilt, but this is where I love the work, and there's so much hope in this because some other research with some of this, the neurobiology is the sensitivity gene. So often, a lot of us who are drinking wine to regulate also will identify as feeling more sensitive, and our kids can too. But what's really wonderful about this, so there's not an alcoholic gene. Like you can't look at the genes and be like, oh, there's the alcoholic gene. It doesn't make sense. But there is a sensitivity gene, and they call it the orchid gene. So a portion of the population are orchids, more sensitive, and another portion are dandelions. And so if you think about an orchid, if we tried to plant it in the crack in the sidewalk, and the sun is beating down on it, and there's no water, and people come by and step on it, that orchid is really going to have a hard time surviving in that environment. But if a dandelion grows through the crack, somebody steps on it, kind of bounces back up. If there's water or not, sunshine, it survives. But what's exciting is if we take that orchid and move it into the environment that it needs, where it actually absolutely thrives. Compared to, we could move the dandelion and it's just kind of like, either way, I'm cracking the sidewalk, I'm in a greenhouse, it just kind of does its thing. But this is what's exciting, the neuroplasticity. So the brain, it's plastic. We've got that, it changes, through behaviors, through environments. So we shift environments, we shift some behaviors. So as parents, it's not like we're doomed. We make some shifts, we do some things in the environment, and our kids' brains, as well as our brains, start to shift like that orchid and can really thrive. So we want to then put ourselves and our kids, and that's my nourish acronym that I work with: noticing nature, observing our breath, replenishing with food, looking at our communities, having some stillness, the creativity. Those are all the things that feed the neurotransmitters that really give that fertile soil for our nervous system to absolutely thrive, especially if we're more of an orchid sensitive type, but dandelions will thrive as well. So it's all good news, because we're adaptable, we're very resilient, and the neuroplasticity can change no matter what age we are. So that's what I like about the hopeful research, that it's not just like, oh gosh, I went through this experience and now what's going to be passed down. The experiences you have now moving forward can be, you can be very conscious about that, your choices with you and your kids, and make big changes.
That's so awesome. And you're right, like it is hopeful. And I think of all the changes that I've made in my life and how I've pivoted, for the better. And you're right, like nothing is a forever thing. We're incredible, resilient humans. And I would definitely explain myself as an orchid and somebody that feels all the feels. And so, yes, I think you're right. You use these mechanisms to sort of function in high stress environments, and yet that has consequences. So, learning how to be, nourish ourselves so that we can be like the dandelion in the crack is part of it, and for our own bodies, because we're also beautifully bio-individual. And that's one of the things that the Nutritional Therapy Association teaches so beautifully, is that there is no one size fits all. We need to navigate this for our own walk. Excellent. So that's fantastic. And so what's next for Jolene Park? What's next for the grey area drinking team? And like, how do we support you? How do we find out more about what you're doing?
Yeah. So all my info is on my website, grayareadrinkers.com. And I train other coaches and practitioners a couple times a year. So that's, like I said, I'm really, really passionate about just putting more of this info, these resources, these pieces to really support clients. And I'm also working on some product for clinics and healthcare practices of just rolling this info in for the staff, for the practitioners within healthcare centers, that then they can share with their clients. So again, every practitioner doesn't have to sit down and become a gray area drinking coach. So I'm really working on that whole product and package. It's digital, it's virtual. Practitioners can just say, here's the login, go check this out, here's the info. And I'm creating all that, a resource that they can just share with clients. So they actually have something. So they're not just like, I don't know what to tell you. I know about AA, I've heard of it, but getting these resources together, getting these trainings to just really empower anyone who's working one-to-one with clients. Because if you're working one-to-one with clients, you're working with gray area drinkers.
100%. 100%. Oh, this is really exciting. I feel so privileged to have had the chance to chat to you about this. And I think it's a really exciting space for giving hope and empowerment for women and men. And I just thank you for your time. I think this has been brilliant.
Oh, well, thanks for having me. It's, just want to keep spreading the word, and more people, share it with others, because even if, you know, someone might be listening and say, I'm not really much of a drinker. I can guarantee that somebody very close in your inner circle will identify with the gray area drinking conversation. So it may be you, someone who's listening, but if not, it's somebody, a close friend, a close family member, a close colleague. It's just so prevalent. It's just all around us. It's really an epidemic. So please, share the info, share the resources, and the more we can give voice to it, it just helps individuals, communities, and global health.
Absolutely. I totally agree. Fantastic. Thanks, Jolene.
Thanks for having me.
Awesome.